Hello, so this is the next instalment of my video recordings detailing stories of various adventures that I've done, mostly running. The next one that I'd like to talk about took place at the end of December 2021. It was between Christmas and New Year, on Thursday the 30th of December 2021. And this one was born out of wanting to do the Taff Trail run between Brecon and Cardiff, but I was too skint to do the ultra at that time, so I thought I'd do it on the cheap. So I'd do it on a shoestring, and I used public transport to get between the end and the start. Ran from Brecon to Cardiff, and then from there I just went on off home. So this is the story of how it came about. So I was planning it. It probably didn't take all that long to plan this one, because it's a fairly easy route in the sense that there's a well-known path, the Taff Trail, and quite a lot of cyclists use that, and they go between Brecon to Cardiff. So the choice was either to run one way or the other, and I decided that I really would prefer to go from Brecon to Cardiff, because psychologically you're going uphill and theoretically you're going downhill all the way, but that's not the reality, because for the first 7 miles or so you're going gradually uphill before you get to the top of the Brecon Beacons Ridge, and then you start going down for a lot of the way. So anyway, here's how things went. So I dumped the car in Whitchurch, I say, in the north of Cardiff. From there I caught a bus to Merthyr Tydfil and another one up to Brecon. So that really is the toughest of the challenges, was trying to hook together the public transport to get between one end to the other. So not only is it slightly downhill, it's also slightly easier to get between Cardiff and Brecon. So I decided to dump the car at the end and go up to the start, because if I'd have dumped the car at the start and then got to the end, it may have been too late at night to be going back from Cardiff up to Brecon on public transport, and things started getting a bit sketchy. So I went the other way around, and I took a bus from the north of Cardiff, and then up to Merthyr Tydfil, and then another one up to Brecon. So there's two buses. And at this time, it was still pandemic season, and so there's masks on everywhere on public transport. It obviously wasn't at a time which you couldn't move around, because obviously I was doing this on public transport. People were back in the zone of moving around, so it was all fine in that respect. As for doing it on a shoestring, it cost me £7.20 for a single up to Brecon, so that was great, absolutely great. And the only other cost was picking up a little bit of food here and there. So roughly cost me about 10-11 quid for an entire day's adventuring, which is a total bargain. So let's have a little look through my diary. I say that I had my lightweight puffer and waterproof on most of the way. When I was travelling up, I then had to stow it away on the front of my run pack once I got off the bus. It was interesting being on the bus going up past Story Arms, and the temperature dropped right down and the visibility became rubbish. I could tell that conditions wouldn't be great on the top. I do remember this vividly now, actually, because the weather, let's say it how it is. The weather outside looks shit, and if you were spending the entire day on the ridge, it'd be pretty grim. So I was glad in a way that I was going up to the ridge and then back down off the ridge and down towards Cardiff. So I got into Brecon, and the bus dropped us all off at Brecon bus station, which is the middle of the town. And I say in my diary that that's where I effectively started my run from. I jogged down through the town to the start of the canal, because the Taff Trail technically starts by the theatre area, by the canal basin, so that's where I started. So I say in my diary that it was busy along the canal with dog walkers, etc., and then not many cyclists out for a cycle path. Conditions were okay with light rain along the flat. So going out of Brecon along the canal, relatively flat, fairly easy going, and the conditions were okay. I say there was light rain, but that was about it. I mean, there's a few puddles here and there. Then I say that there were a few minor ascents towards Pensielle. There are a few puddles here and there, and then the rain started coming down really quite heavily as I went up towards Taliban. So, at this point, there was water basically running down the lane as I was going along. There's water running down the lane and my feet were getting wet. So I was thinking, oh, here we go. It's going to be Blister City. So those are the kind of things which go through your head at a time when you're at the start of doing an ultra run, is that if your feet get really wet, you get slightly concerned. So then I crossed the edge of the reservoir. There's a lot of windy gusts and just sheets of rain crossing my path, and there was local flooding across the causeway. Yes, I do remember that. Then I say in my diary, there then followed what I can only describe as a 5-mile slow creeping death incline of ascent from the bottom of the valley to the top of the ridge, where it crosses over the beacons and then drops down into Pensielle. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. The ascent up towards the ridge was relentless and it was still raining. There were gusts here and there. Now, I have quite a lot of hill walking and mountain experience, and I felt that that held me in good stead, because if I hadn't, I might have slightly panicked, I think. But I knew that I could operate in those conditions, so that was all fine. This was fine. I've known worse, put it this way. So there I was. I was going over the top, there was mist, there was wind gusting across the ridge, and just as I was coming over the ridge into the top of, as I was starting to come down, I found that the wind was so strong, even when I was walking on the horizontal, it was so strong that I just couldn't run. The wind was way too hard, and even when I started jogging downhill, when the road turned downhill, the wind was still so hard that I had trouble even trying to jog downhill. Anyway, down towards Pensielle, I say, and it was a forest track which I was thankful for my trail shoes for. I then skirted around 2 lakes which were seeping out onto the road, and that's a fair reflection that the lake was actually flooding onto the road next to it. And there were these guy in these quad bikes just roaring past me. There's a couple of them just roaring by on quad bikes, which I thought, oh, great. But they were fairly cheery chaps. That was fine. And down at one point, it goes down towards the lake, and then it goes up again, out again, and there was just basically flood water everywhere on the road. So I was almost paddling at one stage at which the water got up to my ankles. So I then say in my diary that I'm glad I held off changing into my road shoes, as I had to wade through floodwater at one point and the rain was still coming down. I then go on to say that after Pensielle, I do eventually change from the trail shoes into my road shoes. This helped freshen things. My feet felt a lot lighter as the shoes didn't weigh as much and weren't as waterlogged. I left the old trail shoes in a bus shelter as I couldn't find a litter bin anywhere, and nobody had their wheelie bins out that day for rubbish. So yeah, I felt a bit guilty in that I just left them inside a bus shelter, but I didn't really have many options other than trying to find somebody else's bin in their gardens, but I just couldn't find any. Anyway, so then I pushed on, and then came the hassle with the tracksters. So I had these old school style Ron Hill tracksters on, and they started to become a bit annoying because they were so waterlogged that they kept on falling down from my waist. So what I did is I tried to roll them up above my knees, just to try and stop them falling down all the way. It's non-alcoholic beer, by the way. Anyway, so then I go on and I say that the trails and roads changed to more of a cycle path now for most of the way back to Cardiff. Onwards I went through Merthyr Tydfil and via Brecon and Pontypridd. These were long, lonely and hard miles as the rain was still there. And I say that I had a couple of bad patches between 20 and 35 miles. The signs kept on saying the same number of miles remaining to a certain place, despite me having run about 1 to 2 miles. It was quite dispiriting. Yes, I remember that. I remember that very vividly indeed. Because you'd go so far, and then you go down a separate path, and then you go down a separate path, and you felt as though you were getting closer and closer and closer to Cardiff. But still, the same number of miles on the sign. Absolutely crazy. Then I say that on the outskirts of Pontypridd I found a corner shop, which is quite good. So I say that after 34 miles, finally I could buy some solid food. I got a cheese and onion sandwich, packet of onion ring crisps, 2 double-deckers, and something like Gatorade. I scoffed the crisps and the sarnie first. This was welcome food, as I had been subsisting on gels and twirls. My body was okay, but I had had a couple of GI issues. Yeah, I remember that. Basically, round by Brecon, I had to dash into the bushes. I think I got a bit of runner's trot. So I suppose I should give a little bit of background as to why it took me 34 miles to find a shop. Is that I was considering picking up some food in Merthyr Tydfil, and the cycle path goes past an area of, it's a little park of what I can only describe as restaurants. You've got like this Chinese restaurant, you've got McDonald's, you've got, I think that there's a cinema, something like that. But as I ran through, it was during that weird COVID period, which you had to queue outside waiting for your order, and there were like massive queues. And even as I was going past McDonald's, and it does take a lot for me to want to eat at McDonald's, because they have very little on the menu that I genuinely want to eat. And so even outside McDonald's there's like great big queues. So I thought, this is going to take me absolutely ages if I have to wait for them to make my food, and for me to get out the other side. So I thought I'd just take my chance and hedge my bets and just go on a little bit further and see if I could find a corner shop, but I never did. Before the edge of Pontypridd. But when you're running an ultra, that's the gamble that you take. You see that you've got to make the judgment of, do you bail now or bail later for food? Anyway, I had plenty of things like gels and chocolate bars on me, so I got as far as I did down to Pontypridd, so there's no harm done. Then I go on to say that as the dusk fell, I saw bats fluttering around by the river coming into Pontypridd. I also started seeing groups of teenagers here and there. I also said that I saw two people in the dark and wondered whether they were making out. Maybe they were and just separated slightly when I appeared. Yeah, that's ever so suspicious. I do remember that. I probably did about 10 miles in isolated dark paths. The worst sections were before and after Nangaru, which had no exit points. I just had to hold my nerve, stick with the head torch and pray that I didn't get mugged or worse. But I got used to it after a while. The only other people out there were the odd runner and cyclist along that skyline. Yeah, so as my diary says, it was slightly scary because I'd never really run in the dark any discernible distance, and so for me that was definitely a learning curve. What I did find, though, as I say, is that the only other people out there were mad runners or cyclists who were out there in the rain, and had a purpose for being out there. Because let's face it, not many people want to be hanging around in the dark when the rain's sheeting down horizontally. So then I say that it was really nice to see the twinkling lights in the distance as Cardiff approached. The sky got visibly lighter as I got closer to the city. I think the only time during this run that I wanted to bail was when I was reaching Pontypridd and I was umming and ahhing whether I'd bail. And in the end I said, okay, I should just see how I feel after a few more miles. And in fact it turned out that I was okay after all. I had to run and walk for a little bit, but by that point I had only about 8-9 miles to go, and I was running mostly by then. So I made it through Pontypridd, down through Nangaru, dropped down through Tongwynlais, then along the river trail to the outskirts of Cardiff and through Forest Farm. Then I say that I cut up Valindra Road, past the hospice and through Whitchurch village, and back to the car. I say that I was okay by the time I got back to the car, and I just sat in the car and I had a double-decker before I started to drive home. What did I say? Yeah, so there's not much more on that day which I can say about the run. Would I do it again? Maybe. But again, it's one of those adventures which once you've done it, you've done it. One of the most poignant things, I suppose, was going past the graveyard in Brecon, because for those who don't know, back in, I think it was the 60s, the Aberfan mining disaster, when the slag heaps above the village shifted and came down on the primary school, basically wiping out a whole generation of the village. And what you see in the cemetery at Aberfan is like row after row after row of white gravestones from the disaster, and that is really quite poignant. And so for me, it wasn't just a run about getting from A to B. You also take in what's going on around you quite a lot too. The sights and the sounds, the history, the heritage, because you go past a number of areas which used to be used for the mining, and certainly the old cycle path itself. I think it was based upon an old railway line, So you're actually running on part of history. Would I encourage somebody else to do it? Yeah, go for it. I mean, it's a really genuinely nice route, lots of variety. There is the section from around 7-8 miles in down to around 10 miles from the end, which is just gradually downhill, so you're just gradually going down and down and down and down. So from that perspective, it's a bit of a runner's dream. Yeah, so that's all I have to say about the Taff Trail Run. I hope that you could find the time to do it yourself as well. Over and out.